Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. As you may know, I've been working on a new one-on-one course, and it's here. Reignite Your Creative Spark is a private coaching program designed to help creative folks build momentum that lasts so they can turn their creative dreams into reality. In 6 private sessions, you'll discover how to engage with your creative dreams with ease and joy, feeling both more confident in yourself and your work and more vibrant than you have in years. Want to learn more? Use the link in the show notes to get in touch. Journalist Warren Berger, who has written for publications such as The New York Times, Wired Magazine, and Fast Company, has a question for you. In fact, he has a lot. He's literally written the book on questions, 3 of them to be exact, and recently updated his book, A More Beautiful Question, for its 10th anniversary. Warren joins me to talk about why questions are important, even more important than answers. We get into why kids stop asking questions, just what a beautiful question is, how Google and AI have changed the way we question, why questions are better than advice, and more. And Warren has some suggestions for those who want to start asking better questions, too. I think you'll enjoy my conversation with Warren Berger. Warren, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you, Nancy. It's great to be with you.
So I start everybody off with the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was a creative kid, for sure. I was one of those kids who created a lot of fantasy worlds, and using toy soldiers and toy action figures and all kinds of stuff like that, and making up games, and created games about baseball and everything where I would use statistics and all kinds of stuff. So I was pretty creative in terms of creating my own sort of stories and games and worlds when I was young. And so I think that was probably, I didn't write much. I did artwork when I was a kid. I painted a little bit. But I didn't take up writing until probably more like, as I was getting into college, and I got kind of serious about writing then.
So what attracted you to writing?
What did attract me to writing? I think it was it was the same thing that I was doing as a kid, creating worlds and that I could inhabit. And so then, writing became a way to do that that was a little less involved than, using all kinds of action figures and things like that. So I was able to create it in my mind. And I think, that's kind of what appealed to me. And I had an older sister who was a journalist for a long time. She worked for Newsweek magazine. And so I knew about journalism. And so in my head, I kind of thought, that might be where I end up going, because I like to write, and so maybe I'll go into journalism. So that was always there probably from the time I was about 17 or 18.
It's great that you had somebody else that you could point to. It was like, she's doing it, so can I.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because like when you're young, you can't really figure out where you might want to go or where the opportunity is. And so it's so important to have role models who show you, this is a possibility. This is something you could actually do.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that meant that you didn't encounter family resistance to the idea, because you'd be like, well, she's doing it, so why can't I?
No, my family was very supportive of whatever, I wanted to do. So they were just, as long as I, went to college and graduated college, that was their main thing. And then it was like, whatever you figure out you want to do after that, that's up to you. So I went on a path of being a journalist, working on a staff at a newspaper and in the magazines, and did that for about probably the first 7 or 8 years of my career. And then again, talk about role models. I saw a couple of people that I knew who were doing freelance writing and just working for themselves. And I thought, that if it's possible to do that, I think I want to try to do it. And at that time, this is a long time ago, we're talking 30 plus years ago. At that time, being a freelance writer was not probably as common as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
So there weren't that many people that just decided, oh, I'm going to be a freelance writer and this is what I'm going to do for a living. I'm going to write articles, magazine articles or whatever for a living. It was very unusual to do, but I had a model of a few people that I saw doing it successfully. So I decided to give it a try, and that's it. I mean, I have not had a job since then.
And I love that it is so often about the model.
Yeah.
You can't really wrap your head around it until you see what it might look like. And then you say, oh, hey, that could work.
Right. Yeah, I think so. But what worked for me too was I was also even though I was pretty creative, I was also very practical minded. So I always was concerned with, oh, how am I going to make enough money and how much am I making this month and how much should I be able to make next month? So I took a very business-like attitude about freelancing. And I think that was really important because a lot of people go into freelancing and they don't have that sort of discipline or that business sense of, taking it really seriously and acting like this is a real job and this is a real business and you have to produce. And so I had that for some reason right from the start. I think I was always trying to justify myself as a freelancer and prove to myself and everybody else that this was legitimate. I mean, I could make a decent amount of money at it, and I wasn't just goofing off, So yeah, that was important, and that enabled me to have a pretty successful freelance writing career for a long time.
So how did you go from freelancing into writing books?
It was really just about taking something that I would write about for a month, like a magazine article, an in-depth magazine article, and deciding, well, what if I I'm really interested in a subject and I stay with it for a year or 2 years or whatever, and I just go deeper. It's really, if a book is 10 chapters, you can almost think of it as like 10 magazine features, and really that was kind of the way I thought about it. It was just expanding a little bit of what I was already doing. And I think the way it happened was I would be writing a lot of articles on one subject, and then eventually either I would come up with the idea or somebody else would suggest to me, you have all this information on this subject or this industry. What if you just put it all together into a book? And the first time I did it, it was about advertising because I'd been writing a lot of articles about the advertising business. That was a focus of mine for a number of years. I wrote for Advertising Age and Adweek and publications like that, and just on a freelance basis. Never took a job anywhere. So, but anyway, I had written so many articles about advertising that a publisher came to me and said, do you want to do a book on advertising? And that was kind of got me going with my first book. And then that has continued to be the case since. Now I go into a subject, I may write some articles about it initially, but eventually I'm putting together enough material to do it as a book.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it as 10 articles, but yeah. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that made it less intimidating to think of it that way. Because sometimes if you think of a book as this giant 300-page project, but if you break it down, and I'm someone who always breaks things down. I do a lot of outlines. I do a lot of, that's just the way I work. So if I'm writing a book, I really break it down into chapters and sections and what's going to be in each chapter, what's going to be in each section. By the time I get done with that, I pretty much know, I have a good sense of the whole book, and then it's not intimidating at all. Then it's never like thinking, oh, I wonder how this will end, or I wonder if I'll run out of material halfway through. I don't have to worry about that because it's all laid out in an outline or a book proposal or something. And so now I just have to fill it in. Now I just have to, I have to just create the material now.
Yeah. When you do that, especially with something where, like the advertising book, where you've already done a lot of writing about it, do you find that you already know everything that you want to talk about in the book, or do you still say, oh, hey, wait, what about this other thing, and go out and do more research?
Yeah, there's always changes that happen. Like when I do an outline, it ends up being, maybe 60% accurate to the finished book. And then there's always like 40% that I was not expecting, things I learned in my research, in the course of my research, that, I had no idea that that idea existed or that person existed. And then suddenly someone will come along and they'll change the way you think about something. And that happens all the time. When I'm interviewing people, I always, often run across people who tell me something that changes the way I think. And I go, oh, wow, that's interesting. That's a whole different perspective. And then it'll take me down a different path, different direction. And that happens a lot. And I like that. That's part of what makes it interesting. I think it would be boring if my book ended up exactly like my outline, then it would just mean I'm, filling in the blanks. But really, there's always surprises and there's always new stuff and new changes of direction and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm definitely the kind of person who would be like, okay, but I know all this already. Why do I need to write the book?
Right. So, yeah. No, yeah. It's well, one thing I've learned too is that the deeper you go, the more you learn how deep everything is, and like I never would have thought that I could write 3 books on the same subject. And yet now on questioning, I've written 3 books. And the end is nowhere in sight. I mean, I could just go on forever writing about questioning, because the deeper I go into the subject, the more I realize that there's more to it than I ever imagined. And there's different directions I can go in. There's different offshoots of it. So it just, I think that's probably true with a lot of things. The deeper you go, the more interesting it gets and the more you learn about things you never knew, even though may have been studying something for years.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with something like questions. Because as I was reading the book, I thought, good grief, you could go down such a rabbit hole of asking questions that you would just never, ever come back out. Right. And I suspect you probably know more about that rabbit hole at this point than most people.
Yeah, well, that's where, the organization becomes really important, and the outlines and all that stuff I was talking about a minute ago, because with a subject like questioning, there are so many directions you could go in. And so you really have to decide early on, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on this aspect of questioning, and I'm going to break it down this way and that way, and I'm going to have a chapter on this and a chapter on that. And it's really important to do that, because otherwise it's almost infinite in terms of what you could do about questioning and the way you could talk about it. I like to compare it to breathing. It's like it's such an important thing, a human thing. There's just it makes it both hard to talk about it, because it's, to a lot of people it might seem obvious, right? Like I encounter people who almost say, like, they may not say it outright, but I can tell they're thinking it. They're thinking, like, why would you write a book about questioning? Again, it would be like writing a book about breathing. Like, why would you do that? Because it's so basic and it's so fundamental that, do you even need to talk about it? Do we even need to explain it? Or, because it's just basic. And that's kind of interesting to me, because, what that reveals is that they haven't thought about it that much. And it's true of a lot of things in our lives. There are many things that we take for granted, and we don't think about them probably as much as we should. And some of those things are very important. They're very important to our lives. Like listening is another one, similar to questioning, right? It's starting to get a lot of attention now. I'm seeing more and more books on listening. But, for a long time, it's like that would be a similar thing. Like people would just take that for granted, right? Like, right. Why do we need to think about listening? We all listen. It's a natural thing. We don't need to talk about it. But yet, when you go into something like questioning or listening or curiosity, you realize that there are all these levels to it that we don't think about. And there are all of these practices that we can do, and there are skills involved. There's just all this stuff that is not just automatic or instinctive the way we might think it is.
Yeah, and to your point, we have books about breathing now too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely that breathing is a
Yeah.
great example. Like you might think, oh, breathing, you breathe in and you breathe out. No, there's a lot more to it than that, and there are
Yeah.
ways to breathe. There are techniques, and breathing can change your life. If I mean, it can change the way you feel. It can change your performance level. So it's like there are just all of these things that we think are simple are oftentimes a lot more complex and a lot more interesting. And the more you think about it, the more you appreciate it, and hopefully, you learn to do it better. Whatever it may be, whether it's listening or breathing or questioning. The more you pay attention to it, the more you learn about various techniques and skills. The chances are the better you're going to be at doing that particular thing. And then the other piece that people may not appreciate is how, if you do get better at these things, these various things we're talking about, they may not appreciate what a difference it can make in your life. I mean, being more willing and able to ask questions just changes every dimension of your life. Everything from your ability to learn, how interesting you are to other people, how interested you are in them, the conversations you have. It just, as I talk about in the book, it even affects things like leadership. We don't think of leaders, right, as being questioners necessarily, but if leaders learn to question well, it can really improve their ability to lead other people. So it has all of these effects and benefits that most people probably are not aware of.
Absolutely. And I know I've mentioned it on the show before, but since I started doing this, I find myself being much more curious about other people and wanting to ask them tons of questions. And I kind of have to rein myself in, like, they didn't sign up for this. This
Right.
is not the podcast.
Yeah.
You can't just do this. But yeah, I definitely am always like, ooh, tell me more about that.
Right. Yeah.
What do I not know about how you got from A to B? And then
And for the most part, it really has a positive effect on other people. I mean, I know that it's possible to take questioning too far, and it's possible sometimes that you can end up asking people too many questions, or they can feel like you're interrogating them or something like that. But for the most part, people love to be asked questions, and they love it because it shows that you care about them or what they're doing. You have an interest in it. It gives them an opportunity to talk about something that they're probably really interested in. So it's a great relationship builder. It's a great way to build rapport. It's the reason why, if you look at people who are in the business of having to build relationships quickly with other people, like coaches or therapists, or like, at the most extreme example, you have someone like a hostage negotiator, right? And they have to build relationships like instantaneously with people.
yeah.
And if you look at what they do, they always build it around questions. Questions are their primary tool that they use to break through to somebody else, to quickly establish trust. And so, we can learn from those people. I mean, they're using questioning in a professional way, but the rest of us can use some of those same techniques in a personal way, in terms of our personal relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you fall down the question rabbit hole?
Well, it started with the fact that I was a journalist using questions as part of my job. And one of the things I noticed pretty early on was that I felt like oftentimes I was around other journalists, other reporters. We'd be covering a story together. We'd be going to a press junket or something like that. And I didn't really like the way other reporters asked questions. I felt that they were asking sometimes the wrong questions. They were asking obvious questions. They weren't asking questions that would draw out more information. They were asking sometimes closed questions when they should have been asking more open-ended questions. They were using the wrong tone. So a lot of journalists will use a sort of aggressive tone, or just a tone that's not particularly welcoming to people. So I really thought, well, there's something wrong here. Like why is it that journalists who use questions every day as part of their job aren't better at it? And then it occurred to me, well, I went to journalism school, and can I remember any courses or any training on questioning? No, I can't. I can't remember a single class when I was going to journalism school that really focused in on formulating questions and the tone of questions and all. It just was a non-issue. And I thought, well, that's really strange. So that kind of was in my head through the years, like, why aren't we paying more attention to questioning in terms of, I guess initially I was focused more on professional people and how they use questioning. But then I started to realize, no, this is like questioning is also important for like everybody, for the general public, And another light bulb moment for me was that I was writing a lot about innovators and just really creative people. So I was writing for like magazines like Wired magazine, and I would be profiling somebody who created some amazing thing, right? Very creative person. And I found that those people oftentimes were really good questioners. So what they were doing though is they were like working on questions in their own head, So it was very different from the kind of questioning that I was focused on as a journalist, which is more about asking someone else a question to try to get information out of them. With these innovators, it was more like they were asking themselves questions that were really interesting. Like, what if we could take this industry and change it by doing that? Or what if we could use this technology that has been developed to find a better way to do X, Y, or Z? So they were always grappling with these big questions about invention and creation and changing the world around us. And so that was a big epiphany for me, because suddenly I started to think, well, questioning, it's not just this communication tool. There's this whole other aspect of it, that the questions we ask ourselves can be this amazing force for like innovation and change and creativity. And once I had that piece, then I really knew, okay, this is big. This is a big subject that is worthy of a book. And that's kind of where I went with the first book. I really focused in a lot on that idea of questioning can help you come up with ideas and new ways of thinking about the world and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it's such a lost art. And, I love that you start the book off with, how many questions little kids ask and how quickly they lose it, because I had sort of thought maybe that stuck with them a little bit longer than it did. And I was surprised by that. I was like, wow. Yeah,
it's an interesting phenomenon. And, most of us know about the idea that kids ask questions. It's like a thing, kids are famous for it, right? They're famous for asking a lot of questions. But we don't really think about, okay, what happens to that? I mean, Does it go away? Does it change? What happens to all those questions? If kids are asking hundreds of questions a day, which they are, according to the research, at what point does it change? At what point does it decline? And if so, why? Why does it decline? And so that was one of the things I looked at in my book. I don't know that there are definitive answers to those questions about what happens to their questions. I think there are theories, there are ideas that we can put out there that, it's a multifaceted thing. Like, for one thing, questioning seems to decline as kids go through school. And I guess we can pretty much assume that education is not really encouraging questioning in our students, because it's so answers based. It's so much about, you have to memorize the answers, and that's what you're going to be rewarded for. That's what you're going to be judged on. And we don't really care if you ask questions. It really doesn't matter to us. So that gets internalized, I think, by young people. They quickly figure out what is expected of them and what is wanted. And so that's one factor. And then another factor is simply there's something about questioning that involves humility, because when you ask a question on the most basic level, you're admitting you don't know something, right? Mm-hmm. So for kids, as they're getting older, this becomes a scary thing, especially as they become aware of peer pressure, how they're being perceived by others. They suddenly or gradually become aware that if I ask a question, is it going to make me look foolish? Or maybe it'll be the wrong question. Maybe I'll ask a question that, has already been covered and I don't realize it, or something like that. Or maybe the other students will just think that when I ask a question, I'm just trying to kiss up to the teacher, or I'm trying to look good or something. So there are all these fears that get tied to, showing vulnerability if you ask a question. And so that's another big thing, I think, that really puts a damper on kids questioning as they get to be like teenagers, and it's all about appearances and how they're looking to their peers. And unfortunately, questioning is not cool. No. I mean, I wish it was. And it's one of the things I talk with people about. How might educators make questioning cool so that kids who do it seem like they're doing something cool? And, it's an interesting challenge. It's an interesting question to think about and work on.
It's a great question. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking back. I used to teach and I've done some tutoring, and I think probably the hardest thing to convince a kid to do in either of those situations is to say, look, I don't understand your homework assignment either. You need to go ask the teacher.
Right.
And they immediately, at least 9 times out of 10, will say, no, I can't do that because then my teacher will think I'm stupid.
Right. Yeah.
And that's when I would always say, well, a good teacher is going to think you're smart because you came and you got clarity and you made sure you understood the assignment rather than potentially doing the wrong thing and failing.
Right.
And it just, they are absolutely dead set convinced that teacher will think that they are the biggest idiot that ever set foot in their classroom.
Yeah.
If they go ask that question. Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge for teachers to overcome that. And it's not easy, but when I talk to educators about this, I just say that I think the challenge is there's a couple of things you have to do. Number one, you have to model the behavior of a questioner, and that means not just asking a student, do you know what the answer is to this? Because that's one kind of questioning, and that's the kind of questioning we expect from a teacher. The person in authority who's calling on you and asking you to give an answer. So that's very common. But I think the less common thing that we see teachers and authority figures do is, grapple with questions themselves in front of the kids, and to say, I'm wondering about this too, and I don't really know. And I wonder if this or that. So they can model the behavior of a curious questioner, as opposed to just what I would call an authoritative questioner, right? Mm-hmm. Who's the person in authority who's calling on you. But model the behavior of someone who's doesn't know everything, is wondering, is curious, and is asking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It got me thinking back to what I could have done differently when I was teaching as a result. But I will say, one of the most memorable and powerful educational experiences I ever had was going to see a professor for office hours in my freshman year in college. And I don't remember what it was that I went to ask. What I do remember was that he didn't give me a single answer. He asked me a bunch of questions that led me where I needed to go. And right. I walked out of there and I thought, wow, that was totally different than anything else I've ever experienced. And obviously it made an impression, even though I don't remember what I went in for in the first place.
Yeah.
That experience was more important than the answer.
Well, that's one of the most powerful things questions can do, is like you can use questions to guide people and to help them come up with their own like insights and breakthroughs. And it's much better than just telling them what to do. This is something that like I will say to a supervisor at a company or a manager, if you can, rather than telling someone how to deal with a problem on their job, if you can help them figure it out themselves, it's going to be way more valuable to them and to you. And questions can help you do that. Very simple, basic questions like, okay, what have you tried so far? And how did that work? And what do you think you could do differently? And, questions like that, which again, I go back to therapists. Think about what therapists do when they're talking to a patient. They don't tell you, the good ones anyway, don't give you the answers. They don't tell you what you should do. They don't say, oh, you're really messing up your relationship with your spouse. Here's what I think you should do differently. Most of them do not do that. They will use questions to try to help you figure out, oh, I see. I think I could try this. And it's just way more valuable. There's a consultant named Michael Bungay-Stanier who says he's big on telling people, stop giving advice. We all give too much advice. He said, you can just simply use questions so that the person figures it out for themselves. You don't have to tell them what to do or what they should do. And it's much better if you don't do that, because you might be wrong. Your advice might be wrong.
Yeah.
It's much better to help them figure it out. And then also, they will appreciate it much more if they've come up with it themselves. If they've come up with the idea themselves, it'll mean more to them than some advice that was handed to them by somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think most people take advice. They think they want it,
right?
But or they think they have to ask for it, but they don't really want it. And a lot of the time, people offer advice when they haven't been asked for it too, which is another issue. But yeah, I've kind of smiled to myself when I got to that part of the book, because I've realized that there is so much unsolicited advice, and that can backfire in its own ways. Whereas you're right. If you can do for somebody else what that professor did for me and ask the right questions to get somebody to really turn it over in their own head, the result is just better, and they're more likely to act on it.
What I would just say to people is, the next time you're thinking about giving advice to someone, think instead about, can I break it down into a few questions about the problem they're having? Like, what is the problem you're having? What have you tried to do before? What do you think you could do differently? How might you take what could be a first step, an easy first step you could take? So you try to break down the questions to very actionable things that they could think about or possibly do. And that's much better than giving advice.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they'll appreciate it more in the end anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So A More Beautiful Question came out 10 years ago, and you've just released an updated edition. And I'm curious to know what made you decide to update it and what you learned in the process of doing that.
Well, there were a bunch of things that, in the 10 years, there was a pandemic. You may not have known that. Right? So I thought that was an interesting thing I wanted to address, because the pandemic was kind of a time when I think people were wondering about change and asking themselves big questions and rethinking some of their priorities, maybe, or the way they worked, things like that, whether they want to go into an office every day anymore or not. So it was sort of a time of questioning. And so I thought that was an interesting thing to address in the new edition, and I did. And AI has happened since then, and AI is really it has a big connection to questioning, because really AI, much like Google search engines, just runs on questioning. It runs on prompts, and which are in many ways questions. So there's an interesting kind of relationship between AI and questioning, and even raises the question of whether, as we move toward AI, do we still need to ask questions or be good questioners, or will the technology do it for us? And so I talk a little bit about how I believe, at least, that right now, technology still is all about answers, and humans are the ones that are responsible for the questioning. So we're only going to get good information out of the technology if we put in good questions. And then on top of that, we also need to use questioning to analyze what comes back to us from the technology, from AI. When AI gives us a nice report on something or an article or something, we need to have our questioning skills in order to analyze it and to ask, does this make sense? Can I trust this? Is it really the best way to say this? So that's where, again, where I think our questioning becomes even more important as we move toward this new world of AI. And then a couple of other things. I wanted to address leadership in this new book. I mentioned earlier that I think leadership, it's really important for leaders to be good questioners. And I wanted to address the area of critical thinking, which really is about, how all of us deal with all this crazy world we're living in, all the information coming at us, and trying to figure out what can we believe, what should we not believe, how do we make sense of all the information overload that's coming at us. And that's where our critical thinking skills are so important. And critical thinking is really all about questions. It's all about knowing how to ask the right questions at the right time when you encounter new information. So that became another new chapter in the book. And then the last thing I added was a little more about interpersonal questioning. When you're asking questions of other people, how do you do it in the most effective way, and how do you ask questions in a way that makes people comfortable, draws out good information from them, creates a good dialogue, a good conversation. So that was one more thing. So I really added quite a bit. I mean, it was about 40% new from the original version of the book, which was, I would say, the original A More Beautiful Question book was much more focused on innovation and creativity. And it was all about, you might not have realized how important questioning is in terms of, coming up with ideas and innovations. So that's still there, but now I've added these other components.
So I'm wondering, and I was wondering this as I was reading, do you think that things like Google with search engines and now the large language models, do you think they're changing the way that we question?
I think a little bit, yeah. I think it has it's a mixed blessing, I would say. It has a positive effect and a negative effect. So I'll start with the positive effect. The positive effect would be we have someplace to go with our questions. like before, in the past, we might have had questions in our head and not known what to do with them. I'm wondering, let's say as a person is saying, gee, I'm wondering about this or that. I'm wondering why this problem exists in the world, or I'm wondering, if there's any history behind this thing I'm seeing. Like, I wonder. So in the past, they would have had those ideas in their head. And unless they were really willing to go to a lot of trouble, like go to the library, and start taking out books and everything, unless they were willing to do that, they probably didn't have any place to go with those questions. Now we all have someplace to go immediately with our questions. We can immediately start getting information right away on whatever the question is about. And so I think that's one big positive change. I think the negative change it has had is this idea that we can get easy answers to our questions just by going on Google, just by going into using AI. That the whatever comes back to us, that's it. Now we know, and I don't think that's true at all. I think that what we need to be thinking of these resources as just a step in the journey of learning and of inquiry. So you may start out with Google and you may start out getting some information, but you have to think of it as, okay, that's only a partial answer and it may not be right. It may not be complete. So I have to, if I'm serious about answering my questions, I have to treat each question as more like a research project, that's an ongoing thing where I'm not only going to ask Google, I'm going to ask people I know, and I'm going to try to find a book on it, and I'm going to think about this question over time. I'll only use Google or AI as a starting point, a launching point, and then I will go from there.
You're reminding me of how, you tell the story of the founder of Polaroid, who was asked by his daughter, why do we have to wait for the picture?
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me wonder, if in 1943 he had Google, would he have just Googled the answer and said, sorry, not possible. Never mind. Going to go back and do what I was doing. So
Right. Well, what's interesting about that question is, and I think this is true of a lot of beautiful questions. The questions that really lead to breakthroughs, and I call them beautiful questions in the book. They're questions that somehow end up changing the world. Okay, and that example that you gave is one of them. A little girl asks her father, "Why do we have to wait for the picture?" And because this is the 40s, he's taken a photo of her, and in those days, you didn't see the results of your photo until a week later or something, right? So she's asking why? Why can't we see it right away? And it causes him to really focus in on this possibility, and it ends up leading to the Polaroid instant camera, where you do see the picture right away. And so what I say about those kinds of questions, like that little girl asked, is they're questions that don't work on Google, right? Like if you typed into Google, why do we have to wait for the picture? Google's not going to know what to do with that question. AI is not going to know what to do with that question, right? Other than maybe give you a really obvious answer. If it can even figure out the question, it may be confused by that question. And if it can figure it out, it may say, we have to wait because the technology says this. So it would give you a very, basic, factual answer. But what happens with beautiful questions is they're really not asking for a factual answer. Like that little girl that question that she asked, the reason it was powerful was because there was no factual answer to it. Like what it was really asking is, why are we willing to tolerate a world where we have to wait for the picture? Right. And Google can't answer that question. Right. Only an inventor can answer that question. An inventor can say, yeah, which the Polaroid guy said was, yeah, we shouldn't have to wait for it. Like there's no good reason. And therefore, I am going to change that. I'm going to create a product where we don't have to wait for the picture. And that, to me, that's what makes a beautiful question beautiful, is that oftentimes when the question is asked, there is no answer. Not only can Google not answer it, nobody can answer it. And when you get that kind of a question, you've got something really valuable. Because if nobody can answer it, and yet it's a really important question that addresses a real need, now you've got potential here. Because if you can answer it, if you can be the first to answer it, you're going to have, your big Silicon Valley IPO that's going to make you $1 billion. And that's why, in Silicon Valley, they're all really looking for those beautiful questions, right? They're trying to find that question that says, why hasn't somebody used technology to solve this particular problem that's driving everyone crazy? Why hasn't someone done it? What has been stopping them? What could I do differently? How could I get started? They're asking those kinds of questions, and that is the thing that will lead them to the big breakthrough.
Right. And I'm also thinking now of the high school student who invented the test for pancreatic cancer.
Right.
Even though, I mean, when I was reading that, I thought, okay, your brother, the chemist, told you couldn't do this.
Right.
That would have been enough to stop me and probably a whole lot of other people.
Yeah.
And he didn't stop.
Well, again, this is the thing about questions that don't have an answer, an immediate answer, either on Google or from, let's say, the established scientific community or the business community or whatever, engineers. They don't have the answer already. And that usually will stop people. They'll say, okay, there is no answer because we don't have it already. That means there is no answer. But what the innovators, including that 16-year-old kid, realizes, just because there isn't an answer already doesn't mean there isn't an answer out there waiting for someone to discover it. And that's kind of the heart of innovation right there. If you believe that, there is something out there that is waiting to be discovered, then, that gives you something to go for. But what leads you to those places is the question. The question is the unanswered question is what drives you and what motivates you, and it's the thing you're kind of working toward. And that's what I think a lot of people did not necessarily appreciate about questioning, is that its role in innovation. We tend to think innovation is all about answers, right? We think it's about, someone comes up with the answer, like a light bulb in their head, just suddenly flashes one day, and then they've got the answer. And no, it doesn't usually work that way. They're usually starting with a question, and they don't have the answer. They don't have that light bulb moment right away. But what they do have is they have a question that they're working on. They're thinking about it. They're doing research on it. They're collaborating with other people. And then eventually, somewhere along the line, things start to click. Ideas start to click into place. And that's when the answer starts to materialize. But, without the question, you're never going to get to that place.
Right, right. Well, and here's the other question that popped into my head while I was reading, because you talk about, and both of these stories kind of illustrate this point, questioning the experts. My brother, the chemist, says I can't do this. It'll never work, but I'm still going to keep going with this. And yet, as soon as I've had that thought about questioning the experts, I thought, okay, yeah, there are valid reasons to do that. If you assume that we already know everything, nothing else will ever happen.
Right.
But where do we find the line between asking questions to find new things or make new things and going too far with it? Like the Titan submersible is what immediately popped into my head. This was a guy who was disrupting everything and paid the ultimate price for it. Right. And I just do you have a sense of how to navigate that as wisely as possible? Did he fail to ask certain questions?
It's a very complicated question to answer. And I do in my book grapple a little bit with this idea of if we say question everything, and we say that as a positive, right? In other words, some people like I like the comedian George Carlin, right? And George Carlin used to say, question everything you're told. Don't necessarily take anything at face value, And then Carl Sagan, the great physicist, was another one who, astronomer rather, Carl Sagan. He's another one who said, you have to be questioning everything out there. And then, you can see where that is valid and it's the right thing to say, but you can also see where it can go wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you have a society where people are always questioning the experts, right? They're always questioning. In other words, anytime the scientific community comes to us and says, this is what we believe we should do in this situation, like the pandemic, this is the best knowledge available is saying we should do this or that or the other thing. And if you have people that are just always questioning experts to the point where they never believe anything an expert has to say, it's going to be a problem, because then what happens is we get to this extreme of saying expertise doesn't even matter. It has no value. And that's not true, like
Right.
these innovators who are questioning the experts. I don't think they're saying that the experts don't matter or the things that we've learned in the past don't matter at all. They're just saying they're having respect for that expertise, but they're saying, I think there might be something that they're missing. I think there might be something beyond that. And I think that kind of respect has to be there. You have to have respect for knowledge. You have to have respect for expertise. Now, you can challenge it. You can question it, but you have to do it with humility and respect. You can't necessarily have this attitude like, I know better than all the experts. That's what I'm kind of seeing now that really bothers me in our world. I'm seeing people who are, they're podcast hosts or whatever, and they're acting as if they know more than people who studied something for 20 years or 30, and it's insane. I mean, it's insane to think that. There's a football player named Aaron Rodgers who talks about things as if he knows more than, the leading scientists in this field. And it's just insane, So I don't know how we got to that point where, expertise is getting devalued and sort of regular people are saying, I know more than any of the experts. But I think that's kind of a dangerous position to be in.
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? There's a distinction between there's a distinction between saying I know more than any of the experts and being a questioner who's saying I respect what the experts are saying, but I think there may be something they're missing. And I'm going to do research. I'm going to get really deep into that area that I think they might be missing. And I'm going to see if there's something I can come up with. And that's what I believe in, people having that attitude and that mindset.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with the idea of having respect for the science, the expertise, what's come before. And I think I agree with you. I absolutely think it's important to question, what do we not know? We think we know this much. What do we not know about it?
Yeah, no, and I think I don't think anything is off limits when questioning, right? I mean, I think on the other side of this issue that we're talking about, you may have people that are, saying, oh, you can't question certain things. You can't question what the government tells you, or you can't question there's certain political taboos you're not supposed to ask questions about. And I don't believe in that either, so I think we have to navigate this very kind of sensitive territory where we have to figure out, nothing is off limits for questioning. Everything can be questioned, but at the same time, we have to be responsible. We have to do it with a certain humility and a certain sense of respect for facts and logic and things like that.
Yeah. And I think the fact that there's so much questionable information out there now probably makes it harder. Somebody who goes in with an honest question, pulls something up on Google and doesn't realize that, it's not valid.
And that taps into a big part of my chapter on critical thinking is about, the most basic thing of critical thinking. Like there's a lot of aspects to it. It can be a very complicated subject to talk about. But if there's one thing that I think is important about critical thinking, if I had to boil it down to one point, it's that when you're doing critical thinking, you are always trying to be fair-minded. So you're always trying to weigh both sides of an issue. You're always trying to see things from multiple perspectives, and you're trying as best you can not to have an agenda, not to say, this is what I believe, going in, and therefore I'm going to look for information that fits what I believe, and I'm going to somehow skirt right past any information that doesn't fit with what I believe. And that to me is the biggest problem we've got right now, or one of the big problems we've got right now, is that we have all this information coming at us, and people are allowing their biases and their tendency to want to believe something in particular. They're allowing that to guide them as they pick and choose what they're going to listen to, what they're going to pay attention to, what they're going to believe. And it's a really big problem right now. And I'm not sure how we address it, but one of the things I wanted to hammer home in my chapter is you can't call yourself a critical thinker if you have an agenda and if you are only trying to, move in one direction with your thinking.
Yeah. Confirmation bias is a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the biggest issue right now around critical thinking.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for anyone who's listening who wants to start asking better questions, short of go out and read the book, which you should because it's really good, but something that you can share in the next couple minutes.
Well, I think it's really about being a better questioner is about paying attention to what's the world around you, and maybe a little more closely. Slowing down. It's about slowing down because questioning is a form of slow thinking. And so if you're kind of rushing around all the time and you're not really giving yourself those quiet moments to sort of think deeply about something, then you're not going to be asking questions the right way. So I think one of the things I advise people is just, give yourself the time, maybe every day or maybe once a week, I don't know, but give yourself some quiet time to think about questions and questions that are important to you, questions about your work, questions about your life. Maybe see if you can come up with one particular question that is really important to you that you want to pursue. How might I find a way to do better at this? Or how might we as a family, or maybe the we as your company or your community, how might we tackle this issue or find a way to do a better job of something or other? If you can identify a big question, that can become a motivating a thing for you. That can become your beautiful question that you're going to work on and you're going to pursue. And so I advise people to do that. I advise them to practice asking questions of other people. Practice asking. When you go to Starbucks, ask the barista about their job, about that blend, about how they make the coffee. Ask your spouse, ask your best friend questions that you maybe never have asked them about something about their life that from years ago that maybe might be an interesting thing they want to talk about. So I think, there's lots of opportunities to do both self-questioning, where you're taking quiet time to ask yourself deep questions, and then taking the time to ask other people questions to learn more about them.
Sounds good. And I think a lot of those things will end up making you a better listener too. So that's a nice bonus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of it. Being a good listener and a good questioner, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, completely. So, all right. Well, I am so glad that we had this conversation. It's been fascinating, and I hope that people will check out the book because it really is a good, fascinating read too. It's full of all sorts of thought-provoking stuff. So.
Yeah, and also I would advise them check out the website because there's a fun website that my creative partner and I created for this book. It's just the name of the book, amorebeautifulquestion.com. And but it's fun, it's not just like about the book. It's really about questioning in general, and there's a lot of fun features on there, a lot of interesting things you can learn from the website, and just things like there's quizzes you can take, and there's a list of songs that have a question for a title. So silly, fun stuff, but all stuff related to questioning in some way.
Yeah, we'll put that link in the show notes so everybody can check it out and fall down the question rabbit hole themselves.
Yeah, go down the rabbit hole. Yep.
So, that's right. Well, thank you so much, Warren.
Nancy, thanks. It was great to meet with you.
That's our show for this week. Thanks so much to Warren Berger for joining me and to you for listening. Please leave a review for this episode. There's a link right in your podcast app, so it's really easy and it will only take a minute. If you enjoyed our conversation, I hope you'll share it with a friend. Thanks so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.